So Brazil's out on the market looking to get more wheat that they can't actually import from Argentina because of the drought. So now Brazil's going to hoard and keep the soybeans in the country, knowing that they're going to get a higher price because of the drought. So they're going to take it off the export market to try to purposely drive price. And these are the shenanigans that are going on when we're heading into a global famine, crop losses, food shocks, and food crisis. And this is the games they're still playing out there. This needs to stop. It really does. We need to feed the planet. And just right now, there won't be enough food, especially in these crop forecasts for the Southern Hemisphere. They're looking at some reduction of 50% on their normal grain production. And that'll be for this year coming into the planting season as we speak.
Hello and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I am Ryder Lee. Tonight we have returning guest David DuByne. David DuByne is the creator of Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube. He discusses energetic changes on Earth as the sun repeats its 400-year cycle of low activity, affecting global crop production, the economy, and everyone on our planet, with a timeline what you can expect from now to 2030 as society resets. Hello and welcome back to the show, David. Thanks so much for coming back on, my friend. How are you doing?
Doing as well as we can do in this chaos phase of the world that we're seeing. Yeah, it's been quite some time. It's been a fair few months since we chatted last. So just think, even the last time we talked, when you did your 100th episode, that was a great one with the 6 of us there in the round table. But how much has literally changed in just those few short months? And, you look at it back then, and that was almost a completely different world. And we're just talking months ago, not even years.
Yes, I'm really excited to speak with you. We have a lot to talk about and cover here tonight, and hopefully we can cram it all in there in this crazy upside down unicorn fairy tale land that we live in, really. And like you said, things haven't gotten any better, which we kind of expected. And check out that 100th episode that I did. It was an amazing conversation. The audio was a little wonky on there, but things happen like that. But I guess where we can start out here tonight with David is, how did we get, I know this is a loaded question, but how did we get into this position that we're in, right? How did we go from a fully functioning society, everything running smooth as possible, economically, socioeconomically, to having the highest inflation in history, food and energy crisis. Germany's having a crazy energy crisis right now. The UK is having a really rough gas prices at the moment, and unemployment as at an all-time high right now. So did you see this collapse coming as quickly as it has?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, how did it happen? Well, if you knew the cycle, intensity, and the onset years of this cycle, which I talk about, this grand solar minimum 400-year cycle, and low solar activity that affects crop production, meaning not enough food, starving people, angry people on the streets. It's a cycle. You go back through history, go back 2,000 years, 3,000 years in history, and then you can see this happens when there's not enough food. People overthrow the persons that are supposedly in charge, because if you can't provide the basics like food, then you don't have any right to sit in a position of power if our families are starving. Visible signs of aging only get worse as we age because of the decrease in our naturally produced collagen levels. Every decade, our skin suffers from a 10% decrease in available collagen supply, which is why you have to start supplementing collagen if you want to keep your youthful glow. Collagen rejuvenates and renews your skin from the inside out with 5 supercharged types of collagen your body needs for youthful looking skin. By boosting collagen levels with multi-collagen, you'll help restore your skin's elasticity and thickness while reducing the appearance of wrinkles. Try it risk-free for 60 days. And take 51% off your order by going to healthwithadapt2030.com or clicking on that link in the description box below. After you order, it's going to be sent straight to your door along with a couple extra bonuses. It is time sensitive, so order now. And let's get on with the video. Okay, so you understand that that is the catalyst for almost everything seen in history in the last 3,000 years was food. It's not about the economy went bad. It was because there wasn't enough food, which is the reason the economy went bad. Or why did one nation invade another nation? Well, they were looking for better food growing opportunities or ways if they couldn't work out with trade agreements through history. We're going to go in and take the best food growing lands for our people, because happy people with full bellies will do anything you say. So that's literally how it began is, with the research that I'd done and so many others, the onset for this grand solar minimum intensification to the point that it would be statistically measurable crop losses globally was right around 2020. And we got to that point, and now it seems like controllers are taking over to create the chaos, to give excuses for why the crops are being lost. Because you just can't go from zero, like you're talking about, fully functional society, just to the second, supply chains and systems to keep things moving across the planet, goods, services, repair parts, energy, whatever, was all flowing at light speed. But how do you explain away suddenly that, oh, we can't grow enough food to feed the planet? There's got to be some mechanisms in there. And the way you look at it, it's just everything's being turned off right now on purpose. Almost every distraction that you're seeing is going to get bigger as well. Because the closer we march to global famine and food shortages across all nations, including the United States in the future, we'll be the last ones to experience it here, luckily in the US. The world will be burning down around us before it comes here. But once it reaches to about the 100th country where there are food riots, you're getting precariously close. The United States is going to be following pretty quickly. There's going to have to be all these excuses, and the next excuse needs to be more grandiose than the last because the shock value is worn off. So, as we transit down from here through 2023 and 24, and this first wave of magnetic canceling on the sun, there's two waves that are coming with magnetic field anomalies on the sun that are now affecting our jet streams and our cloud cells, rainfall patterns that we're seeing on the Earth here. The first one's going to culminate at the end of 2024, right around October. And then it's an unknown what will happen after that point. Will magnetic fields stabilize? But it does show that there's a second peak in destabilization that will occur around 2028. I think once we run through both these waves of magnetic canceling and decreased magnetic field off the sun, also decreased magnetic field on our planet, more cosmic rays. There's a lot of things in play here. I think after that point, right around 2030, things should start to stabilize a bit more. And see, here's the thing. We're coming into this phase, the chaos phase is what I call it, where all systems would have broken down anyway. You just need to go back in history books and look how things have broken down and how fast they broke down based on prior cycles of this same 400-year grand solar minimum. And it'll run its course. We should be finished with it around 2030, and then watch how society be restructured, restabilized. Things that are unthinkable now in terms of breakdowns will suddenly right themselves, and we'll start trucking along again like 2030, 2032. And they'll be like, see the chaos that was there. We have to have a global governance structure to control this because look how much chaos these last decade was. We can't live through that again. We got to have a global currency, global governance structure, and everybody be on board with us. Great. But we're still in control. And oh, by the way, central bank digital currencies, programmable money will be part of the mix too if they have their way. So that's why we're here right now. Do not delude yourself that this is in any way organic. These are all planned events to explain away. So we're pointing fingers at each other, not pointing fingers at truly the problem, which would be central banking and the elite and governance structures on this planet right now. Sorry to ramble on that, man. I just had a double espresso with ice cream earlier. I'm ready to go.
I got an energy drink right here, so I'm right there with you. So I was thinking about, because you brought up the grand solar minimum, and I was kind of thinking about this the other day, because we know that Bill Gates has talked about spraying particles into the air to block out the sun, right? To help with global warming. But we know that the planet isn't actually warming, it's cooling, right? So could they actually use the excuse that as like a cover, that they sprayed these particles in the air to block out the sun? And the reason that they did that is why that we're going to go through this little mini ice age cooling of the planet, even though that it was going to happen anyway, because we know that they have to use excuses for everything and blame something else other than taking responsibility and letting people know actually what's happening. So do you see anything that they could, use that as an excuse to be like, oh yeah, we're going into this grand solar minimum, and the reason that we're going into it is because we sprayed these particles in the air to try and block out the sun?
And we are the gods controlling the weather, and you shall worship us as such. It's almost like we're reverting back into like the Sumerian eras or the Babylonian eras, where they want you down at the base of the pyramid on your knees, giving homage because they could, quote unquote, control the weather. But what if they're really doing absolutely nothing, making it appear that they're doing something, but it's all a natural running course? Now, here's the scary thing. So we understand that geoengineering in turn is really, you see those lines in the skies and stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, and they even have a new term. So if you see these lines in the sky that they spray in the morning and they spread out, it's homogeneous cirrus. There's actually a real new name that they get. And here's the scary thing. They use the Latin, which means man-made cloud. And so they've renamed it this last year. And it's actually a cloud in the cloud dictionary now. But if you break down the Latin, it means man-made cloud. The problem I have with this is, the Tonga eruption in January of 2022 was double, at least, the intensity of the Pinatubo eruption, which occurred in 1991. Now, if you're fans of history, 1991 and subsequent 92, Earth's temperature cooled 0.7 of a degree because of the particulates, the ash, sulfur dioxide, dust, that sort of thing from the eruption in the atmosphere. It was about a year later when the cooling started to happen. Well, now we had Tonga happen, 20 degrees south latitude, January of this year, 2022. It was at least double the height of ejecta into the atmosphere. And this time it also included water vapor. So just on a general sense, 25 miles into the atmosphere is where Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines had ejected ash into. So we'll give it even 25 miles. This Tonga eruption went up 52 miles. So it's literally more than double. So the amount of cooling impact should be measurably noticeable in about another 3 months in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, see, you're not really hearing about the Southern Hemisphere. And this was the presentation that I gave at the dairy conference that I went to just a couple weeks ago. They're going into their planting season right now. And the maturing crops in the fields didn't really get to where they could be for any kind of noticeably large yields. Because after the eruption, that was placed in the Southern Hemisphere, and all the crop growing zones across South America, Australia, South Africa were already struggling anyway. There's a lot more, it's just dimmer down there because of the water vapor, volcanic ash, and the sulfur dioxide that blew up into the atmosphere. So now we're coming into the planting season, but the winter's really incredibly long-lived this year. They're still getting record snows, record cold temperatures, just blasting all temperature records kept in September out of the water, especially in New Zealand. It's a little bit higher altitude, a little bit further south. So some of these effects are being, amplified. And then you got these jokers putting particulates in the atmosphere. And this was one thing, and I must say, David Keith and the marauding bunch of atmospheric pirates that are around the planet, they had talked about a runaway worst case scenario of once they were to spray all this and, the particulates are up there, barium, strontium, aluminum, everything's reflecting, negating charged particles coming in from cosmic rays because of a weakened magnetosphere, that their main fear was that we would have a Tambora type eruption that would add all this extra ash into the atmosphere in addition to what was up there. 3 years is what they were looking at for anything to rain out. If they stopped their program after a VEI 7 eruption or a VEI 8, it would still take 3 years. And they were concerned about running into a global famine as fast as a freight train into a brick wall because they couldn't get the particulates out of the atmosphere. That's exactly what just happened in January. their worst case scenario, but they kept playing it off like, well, there hasn't been that large of an eruption since Mount Tambora in 1815. So the percentage of a large atmospheric eruption and, going up 50 miles plus well above into the mesosphere, that kind of eruption only happens once every 200 to 400 years, and it hasn't happened. So we're not even concerned about it. It's so far out of the statistical average of possibilities that we're going to run away and keep going with this, whatever program of stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. Well, nature just flacked that trump card down on top of him and said, we're going to teach you a little lesson if you want to play God. Now you're going to have the wrath of the people because you're going to starve him. This is where it took a very drastically bad wrong turn when they're putting up the aerosols, and then we just had this massive eruption happen. So Southern Hemisphere is going to be absolutely knocked out at the knees in terms of crop production this year. And we're already looking at the grain corridor shutting down in Ukraine, stoppage of fertilizer exports. Electrical shortages across Europe have shuttered almost every single chemical facility, which means no pesticides, no herbicides. And we're looking at literally like not a Six Sigma black swan event, but like a pond full of black swans in front of your front porch there, all swimming 50 or 60 of them at a time. This is where we sit, really, in the precipice of history. This is a civilization-changing event here, once on the order of 400 to 2,000 year magnitude that we are in the midst of experiencing. So just kind of frame it in context of that as to what's happening and what kind of distractions are going to need to be out there to distract away from everything I just described to you. So, Ryder, you might have a better, grasp of that. So everything I just talked about needs to have one distraction or series of distractions so the populace doesn't put it all together. So what would that distraction be, or series of distractions, do you think?
Well, if you look back through history, war is always the biggest distraction that they can possibly do. And that's what they've done almost every single time. And they take us to war, and then they blame everything on the war. And that could be a blame for the food shortages. It could be, a blame for more people passing away, and it's really something else, but it's interesting that you brought up the Tonga explosion, the volcano explosion, because I feel like a lot of people forgot about that. Right. And I had a guest on the other day, and she was talking about how volcanoes are the largest producers of carbon on the planet. And I was like, I don't know about that. So I researched it. I looked it up. I did all the math. And between active volcanoes and inactive volcanoes, they produce 645 million tons of CO2 carbon per year. Right. So then I looked at a printout of all the countries that produce carbon yearly. The latest data that I could find that had a list of all of them was from 2016, but it doesn't really fluctuate that much from year to year. China is still number one producer of carbon with 10 million metric tons, and the US is number two at 5 million. And when I added all of these countries together, which took a long time, it took me a couple of hours to get through all this, it roughly produced, all the countries in the world produce 41 million tons of CO2 is produced from all the countries in the world combined.
And volcanoes, 600 million.
645 million tons of carbon per year. So in reality, volcanoes produce more carbon in 1 year than humanity does in 15 years. I was mind blown. I was like, holy crap. And when you look at all the numbers, you're like, oh, you start calculating. I calculate them just right off the top of my head. And I came to something, when you look at it, you're like, holy crap, this is insane. Right. And they're, complaining about where the humanity is the worst producers of carbon on the planet, when that's not true. Right. So it was unbelievable when I added them all together. I was like, wow. And I did that specifically just for this talk, and I took all the time to do that. But yeah.
This is all kind of marching us toward forced climate lockdown. And when I say that, it's just literally you're not allowed to use the energy, and there can be zero emissions from you on this day, this month, or whatnot, and your energy is restricted. And that's exactly what we're seeing across, the developed nations of the planet at the moment, Europe being number one. I mean, they're being forced onto rationing whether they want it or not. And you saw the whole planet during 2020 and 2021, the way it was shut down, whether you wanted it to or not, how many small businesses, whatever. But you could saw those emissions drop off. And really, after all that time, it was just such a blip that it was almost unregisterable on how much it declined, even though the world's entire business structure shut down for almost 2 years. It was barely measurable in terms of parts per million that dropped off after all business was stopped. So then you come up into this. All right, well, maybe that was a litmus test to see, would people voluntarily stop doing business for carbon lockdowns, or would they not? So that probably no for most countries. So what's the next option for, mandatory this or that? Well, it's going to be forced rationing. Like those in Europe have no choice on how much electricity they're going to get. They're going to be with their little begging bowl going, please give us enough just to keep our homes warm enough so we can sleep and not freeze tonight. That's really scary when you're talking about developed economies like Germany, France, this sort of thing, right in the middle of going into winter, and they don't have enough power for their citizens, or they're saying you can't turn on your heaters from, I think it was 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. to the next morning. Like, these kind of things are happening. And if you do, then they're going to come and arrest you and fine you. And what kind of world are we moving back into? It's kind of are we going back to serfdom, do you think? I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, Ukraine is telling us that there won't be any winter wheat or corn for the winter. So Ukraine is the biggest supplier, the largest export of wheat to Egypt, Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, right? Which I believe Ukraine has exported, I believe, 90% of their wheat for this marketing year. I'm not too sure on the numbers. I looked it up last week or something like that. It might be more or less, which is, it's cool for the rest of the year, I suppose, but it's not looking good for the last, next year. So it's like, well, where do these countries that are importing grain, where are they going to get their grain? When, they said that, there won't be any wheat or corn for the winter. So we're in a really big bind. And then, the UK is also warning of blackouts as well, and is kind of getting hit with a energy crisis. Well, not really an energy crisis, more of a gas crisis. The price of gas has risen astronomically.
Got some numbers for you on the Ukraine thing. I've been diving into the last few days, as a matter of fact, because the grain corridor is closing. Indeed, they did come out, and there was the Minister of Agriculture from Ukraine said there will be no winter wheat. We're not going to plant it. So if you're looking at the numbers of what got planted this year in a regular just year, they would have 100% of field space that would be planted in Ukraine. Well, this year they only planted 30% of that. So the yields of the harvests that are coming out that are going to be harvested this year, really just in the next, literally now, and in the next months or so, it would only be 30% of what their total 100% yield would be anyway. So they were down 70%. Another thing about when you're talking about marketing year exports, they generally would export somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 million tons, somewhere 15 million on a really good year. They were the largest exporter of grains in the world outbound. This year, they're pushing 8 at best. So the problem was that they had a lot of storage capacity full still, but they're trying to bring in this new crop. So what they're finding is, with the war, their crop storage was suffering. They didn't have the persons on site. There's been a lot of damage, wet damage, insect damage, pest damage. They didn't really maintain the facilities at the normal rates that they would have an overseership to store those grains properly. So what they're finding, there's a lot of grain that can't even be sold. Like, a lot of it didn't even pass EU inspection for animal feed. So then they were looking for these like tertiary, third, fourth, fifth markets of anybody that does take anything because their people are starving. And then they send it out and they give themselves a pat on the back like they really did something special for the world. That was the animal feed that you couldn't sell into Europe that you wanted to give to Sudan, to the South Sudan. Come on, really? And these are the kind of little tricks that are being played with the statistics over there. So what they're looking at here is when they're bringing the new grain in, some areas they can't actually move it to a good storage facility because the rail lines are blown up, and there's been a huge bunch of new attacks over there. Russian forces taking out their infrastructure. So they're really limited on where they can put any new harvest. And what they're finding is, okay, maybe we scoop it out and we put the new stuff in, or we just pour it in the sea because we can't export it. And at least we got the new storage space for the new crop that's coming in. Like, now what? Where's all that grain coming from? And then these downright scary, pronouncements and announcements from the grain councils and the agricultural minister out of Ukraine itself. There's no corn, there's no winter wheat coming. So then next year, what happens? Kazakhstan is still on their 6-month grain embargo. Kazakhstan is in the top 10 of exports of wheat as well. And Brazil said they're going to keep all the soy in the country because of the third La Nina, cool weather, cool waters off the Pacific, that they anticipate more drought. So they figure that if there's more drought, especially in Argentina, they can't grow enough wheat. So Brazil's out on the market looking to get more wheat that they can't actually import from Argentina because of the drought. So now Brazil's going to hoard and keep the soybeans in the country, knowing that they're going to get a higher price because of the drought. So they're going to take it off the export market to try to purposely drive price. And these are the shenanigans that are going on when we're heading into a global famine, crop losses, food shocks, and food crisis. And this is the games they're still playing out there. This needs to stop. It really does. We need to feed the planet. And just right now, there won't be enough food, especially in these crop forecasts for the Southern Hemisphere. We're looking at some reduction of 50% on their normal grain production. And that'll be for this year coming into the planting season as we speak. But they still can't plant because it's too wet and too cold. So where does that? They should have been planted already. They should be well into the, teens, high 20s, maybe 30% on planting, but they're remaining around 0 at the moment in many countries. So something's gone terribly wrong in the Southern Hemisphere.
Where was it, Germany or the UK that said that they were going to import their grain from Canada in the United States? That was just opened up the other day, wasn't it? I can't remember what country they said that it was from.
Well, I didn't hear that, but I will say one thing. The Mississippi River is at near all-time record lows, and the guys that really do shipping and logistics and grain shuttling and this kind of thing, we're saying that the Mississippi River is going to be locked up super glued tight until April because the weather system's coming in. Once it gets a little cooler and that starts to be snowpack, not any kind of rain, plus there's drought everywhere, that they wouldn't expect any kind of like raising of the water table there or the water depths until April. So the only way possible that Canadian grains are rolling over to export bound nations is on rail out to the port. They're not shipping anything downriver there. And, Canadian grains coming out of the Great Lakes, so if you're not going to be taking it by barge, you're going to be limited because rail space is so incredibly tight right now. You have no idea. These grain shippers in the States, they're buying out forward like 12,000 tons a week on rail line capacity, and they get cut 20%. Oh, we just don't have the cars anymore. Wait, we just paid you how many umpteen millions of dollars for rail space, guaranteed money in your pocket for revenue, and you still cut us 20%? There is a huge bottleneck on rail cars at the moment, to the point it's causing chaos in deliveries, where they're out in Ohio now looking for corn when they would normally get it from somewhere further out west like Kansas, northern Texas, but that they can't get it there because they can't get rail space, and there's the drought, and it's reduced production of something like 700 million bushels this year in America. So, dairy people are running over to Ohio to get grain shipped out to California, but they can't get the rail space. So even Canada, since it's the same rail network running amongst the borders here, they could get some out, but it's going by rail out to the port, and it's extremely constricted right now. So I would love to get that article and get my hands on it, what you just spoke about on who's expecting grain deliveries out of which ports. That'd be a good one to read.